Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for attending the C20 Summit and for attending this panel discussion on the realities of female empowerment, one of the first panels for this year's summit. My name is Kavita Singh, and I'm the moderator for this panel. It's incredible to have speakers and attendees joining us from all over the world. I personally am joining in from New York City, where it's about 5:30 a.m. right now. The fact that we have participants, activists, policymakers, students, allies, all kinds of attendees here from across multiple cultures, geographic locations, and time zones really speaks to the critical importance of the topic that we're discussing in this panel. Issues like domestic violence and workplace harassment, unequal pay, child marriage, female genital mutilation, limited access to sanitary products, and the gender confidence and achievement gap, just to name a few issues, don't pay any mind to what time it is. These issues don't go to sleep or go on holiday. They don't care where you live or what unforeseen events might be going on in the world. So before I introduce our esteemed speakers and get into our panel discussion, I want to briefly talk about why we're here today. There's an African proverb that I've heard many of my mentors in this space, including Dr. Natalia Kanem of the UNFPA and Ms. Sarah Hilware use. And it goes, when you close your eyes to the facts, you learn through accidents. So let's talk about the facts. We're here because the past 25 weeks have set us back about 25 years in terms of all the progress that has been made on female empowerment and gender equity. We're here because when schools in many parts of the world eventually reopen, girls will be less likely than their male counterparts to return, closing off opportunities not only for themselves, but also for future generations. We're here because women spend 2 to 10 times as much time on unpaid care work as men. We're here for the 1 in 4 girls in the United States who will become pregnant at least once before they turn 20. For the 4,000 school-aged girls in Kenya who have become impregnated since the COVID-19 related school closures in March. For the 2 out of 3 girls worldwide who have no idea what is happening to them when they start menstruation. For the estimated 20,000 women who are killed every year, and for the countless others who do not feel safe walking the streets at night for no other reason than that they're female. We're here because as many of us are here today, either participating in this summit or attending or watching from home, there are hundreds of thousands of girls around the world who do not have that same opportunity to do so. Whether we realize it or not, all of the above issues impact all of us, either directly or indirectly. A country's economic standing is directly correlated with the health and education of its girls. Girls who are not able to attend school either due to sickness or familial and child rearing obligations or gender-based violence or poor self-image miss out on the opportunity to contribute to the well-being of their country's economy. And this affects not only the girls themselves, but also their families, their communities, and future generations. Marginalizing girls perpetuates the cycle of poverty, which hurts all of us in the long term. The COVID-19 pandemic especially has disproportionately impacted girls and women. So the time to raise awareness and take action, therefore, is now. Not doing so will only further reverse all the gains that we've made in empowering girls and women and closing the gap that exists between them and their male counterparts. Closing the gender gap and female empowerment is the impetus behind my work at Girls Health Ed, where I have the honor of serving as executive director. Our mission is to empower girls to make healthy and informed decisions throughout their lives. To this end, we provide medically accurate, gender-transformative comprehensive health and sexuality education to adolescent girls and young women in underserved communities globally. As I alluded to earlier, there is a wide confidence gap between boys and girls that develops during puberty. While boys and girls both experience a drop in confidence during puberty, young men are more likely to get their confidence back by adulthood, while young women are not, leading to a confidence gap throughout the lifespan. It is therefore vital to target girls with interventions during puberty itself so that they can take charge of their well-being and prevent any issues that women often face as the result of this confidence gap. Girls Health Ed's comprehensive curriculum covers nutrition, physical activity, body image, puberty and personal care, violence prevention, healthy relationships and consent, menstruation, and reproductive health. In the short term, this education leads to improved health knowledge, attitudes, and behaviors, and overall healthier choices, which over the long term leads not only to decreased risk of chronic and infectious diseases and better health outcomes, but also improved confidence, better academic outcomes, and changes in social and cultural norms around gender equity. Girls Health Ed therefore equips girls with the skills and tools to address all of the issues that we'll be discussing during this panel and impact change in their communities. It is now my immense pleasure to introduce to you our accomplished and dedicated panelists who work tirelessly to address the above issues and to create a better world for girls and women everywhere. Emanuela Pozan is the Senior Specialist for Gender Equality and Non-Discrimination at the International Labor Organization. Her work deals with the care economy, pay equity, and workplace violence and harassment. Dr. Alanud Al-Sharek is the Director of ICBAR Strategic Consultancy. She chairs the Abolish 153 campaign to end honor killings in Kuwait and the Friends Who Care project to help at-risk girls in Kuwait's social care system. Dr. Musimbi Kanyoro is the board chair of United World's Colleges and Women's Learning Partnerships. She is a passionate advocate for education and women and girls in leadership. And Bailey Greenspan is the acting co-CEO of Girls 20, a global charity advancing young women in leadership and decision-making processes. We also have two panelists who were unable to join live, unfortunately, and have instead submitted pre-recorded remarks, which will be shown shortly. Kara Jabola Carolis is the Executive Director of the Hawaii State Commission on the Status of Women, and Dr. Debra Kobar is the Regional Director for Latin America and the Caribbean at Plan International. So with all of that in mind, I'm excited to begin our panel. You're welcome to post about the panel on social media using the hashtag C20 Summit, and be sure to tag C20 or Civil 20 on the appropriate social media platform. After the panel discussion, we'll have some time at the end for a few questions from the audience, so please feel free to include your questions in the chat function. So we'll now start by showing the pre-recorded messages. We'll start with Kara's.
Aloha, my name is Kara Jabola Carolis, and I am the Executive Director of the Hawaii State Commission on the Status of Women. We're glad to join you as a feminist government agency in the United States. We're charged with restoring the venerated status of women and gender nonconforming people. Since the beginning of patriarchy, since the beginning of class society, women as a gender group have been denied the right to exit servitude, denied the right to exit servitude for men and for society. We've been denied the right to exit harmful relationships, denied the right to exit harmful industries such as domestic work and sex work, which are vestiges of women's slavery. As Esperanza Fonseca recently put it, the right to exit is the most denied right in the world today. And capitalism all but ensures that this right will remain elusive for the majority of the world's women. We know this because economic independence and the ability to survive, which requires wages, is a central prong of the right to exit. And women as a group will never be able to participate in waged work equally to men. The good news is that COVID-19 is presenting an incredible moment of organizing. Women around the world are waking up to the fact that our homemaking, our caregiving, and our love is in fact stolen labor. We're seeing ourselves as a political group that is being exploited to carry the world through COVID-19 and the economic shock that are a result of the crisis. And what are we getting out of it? What we did at the Hawaii State Commission on the Status of Women is to convene a collaborative group of grassroots feminist activists and government officials to create a feminist response team to COVID-19. We've met every single week for the past 7 months, and together we have not only built a rapid response to the gender contours of the crisis, but also developed a plan that is unapologetically feminist to build back out of COVID-19. One of the central components of this plan is finally delivering economic independence and survival to women without a reliance on waged work. How we did this, I will leave to you to read about in Hawaii's Feminist Economic Recovery Plan from COVID-19. I hope you look it up. But at its core, it is really about focusing on values that underscored sustainable societies and sustainable economies. And part of that was leaving behind American values and focusing on what Native and Indigenous women had to say about the way the system is not working and a system that could be working better. So with that, I leave you and thank you for this time to speak with you. And please stay in touch with me, Kara Jabola Carolis, at the Hawaii State Commission on the Status of Women.
Excellent. And now we'll be watching Debra's remarks.
Thank you for the invitation to participate in this important event. First, because of the great opportunity to speak before this audience, but also because it's a great way to open dialogue spaces, which will allow us to recognize the importance of working on gender equality since childhood. Many times when we talk about gender equality, the image of an adult woman automatically comes to mind. When we talk about equality policies, we usually think of policies aimed at adult women, which is great, and we recognize and celebrate progress made. However, at Plan International, we are convinced that to strengthen this progress, actions to enhance gender equality must begin in a very early age, as gender discrimination and socialization start early and continues through a person's lifetime. During early childhood, all children develop a sense of self-worth, identity, and belonging. They learn gender attitudes and expectations about how girls, women, boys, and men should behave, and about their value and role within society, limiting and creating equality to all children, particularly for girls. A major barrier for women starting in childhood has to do with gender-based violence. The data show us that in regards of sexual violence, for instance, the main victims are girls. The 74% of the cases of sexual violence in Colombia are girls under 14 years old. In Honduras, the 83% of documented sexual violence cases are girls under 19 years old. And these aggressions do not occur from strangers, but from individuals, which are closest to the girls, most of the time from their own family members. During this crisis, the long quarantines imposed to contain the spread of the virus have in many cases forced the girls to be confined with their aggressors or potential aggressors and made it even more difficult for them not to be able to call for help since they could not get out on the streets and did not have access to schools, one of the places that has proven to be a protective space for the girls. On the 25th anniversary of Beijing Platform for Action, we were able to talk to girls globally as they mentioned gender-based violence as a top priority issue across all consultations. A series of consultations and a global survey were conducted with more than 1,000 girls. They described violence as an avoidable everyday reality in their lives at home, at school, and public spaces. They believe that gender-based violence determines the outcomes they can achieve in their lives. They strongly stated that unless violence and abuse against them is addressed, progress in other areas of development will be undermined. Finally, working with and supporting boys and men is a central element in Plan's gender transformative work. Involving them from an early age can support changes in the position of women and girls whilst enhancing gender equal relations in communities. The work we do to support boys and men to embrace healthy and positive attitudes and behaviors and adopt new masculinities and challenge gender norms is fundamental. No matter all the progress made in advancing public policies and legislations to address, prevent, and punish gender-based violence, as long as there are still such high rates of social tolerance towards this type of violence, we will continue to be unable to implement concrete, sustainable actions. At Plan International, we consider that we are in a strategic phase since we have the possibility of working on these issues from early childhood at community level. But we are aware that we need to join forces with many more allies so that together we'll contribute to realize girls' rights and fostering inclusive, respectful, and peaceful societies. Again, thank you very much for your attention, for this space, and the opportunity to share all our experiences with you. Bye.
So those were both powerful talks. Thank you so much to Cara and Debra. So I'd now like to turn it over to our live speakers, and I'll start with some questions for Emanuela. So Emanuela, violence and harassment are major impediments for women to access and thrive in the workplace. So my question for you, my first question for you is, in your view, has COVID-19 had an impact on violence and harassment against women in the workplace? And if so, how, and what can be done about it?
Thank you, Pavita, for this question, and a very good day to this beautiful C20 global community. On behalf of the International Labour Organization, I would like to truly thank the organizers for the invitation and for this great start of with colleagues from different parts of the world that have already set the scene on what is happening and hopefully what we can do. So COVID-19, we have seen, it has been a somber reminder of how important it is to address violence and harassment, including in the world of work, and how this world of work is changing and transforming so rapidly. Now, as it has already been said, with the lockdowns, the curfews, forcing people to stay at home, and when possible to turn their homes into workplaces, the risk of violence and harassment has increased. And we have seen alarming spikes in domestic violence, with countries reporting up to 30% increase in domestic violence. But we have also seen domestic violence, not just against women, but also against people with disabilities, and in some cases also against men. Now, it's clear that domestic violence has an impact in terms of health, safety, and productivity. And that it is really an impediment for women, and in particular young women, to enter the world of work, to remain and to progress in the labor market. We have seen how COVID-19 has reshaped overnight the way many people work, shedding light on venues where work-related violence and harassment may occur, both in the formal economy and in the informal economy. We have seen horrible examples, for instance, of chlorine thrown at nurses, so workers, nurses, while commuting to and from work. We have seen grocery store workers beaten and verbally abused by clients due to supply shortages. We have seen a lot also of cyberbullying happening because of the increase in teleworking. And we do know that there are some sectors that are particularly prone to violence and harassment. For instance, the health and social work, which has been exposed for a very long time, the emergency services, domestic work, or works that take place at night or in isolation. All this type of jobs in these sectors have been more exposed to violence and harassment even before the pandemic, and more so during the pandemic. Now, to mitigate the impact of violence and harassment in the world of work, it is very important to place occupational safety and health measures that explicitly aim at preventing, reducing the psychosocial risks, including violence and harassment. So what can we do? And here comes the part that hopefully will help solving the situation. So I think among the audience, there are a lot of people that are familiar with the ILO Convention number 190, the latest international treaty on violence and harassment in the world of work. It was adopted on the 21st of June, 2019. So it is now 1 year older. And we have celebrated its first anniversary in June, despite COVID. It has been ratified by Uruguay and Fiji, and it will enter into force in June 2021. Now, we expect many more countries to ratify this convention in the coming months. We know that due to COVID, some of the political processes have been delayed, but we count approximately 20 to 25 countries where political processes are taking place towards the ratification of Convention 190. So I want to see this as a positive sign. Now, what is in brief so unique about this convention, and why is it so relevant also in the context of domestic violence? Because Convention 190 recognizes the right of everyone to a world of work free from violence and harassment, including gender-based violence and harassment, and recognizes that violence and harassment in the world of work can constitute a human rights violation or abuse, and that violence and harassment is a threat to equal opportunities. It's unacceptable, incompatible with decent work. So Convention 190, as I said before, clearly recognizes that some sectors are more exposed to violence and harassment and requires member states in consultations with workers and employers to identify these sectors and put in place effective measures. The convention recognizes that violence and harassment has a negative impact on the organization of work, on workplace relations, on workers' engagement, on productivity, on the enterprise public image and reputation. And so the convention calls for measures to protect from violence and harassment, to prevent through, for instance, the provision of enforcement remedies. And Convention 190 recognizes very clearly the link between domestic violence and the world of work. And it calls upon member states to recognize the effects of domestic violence and mitigate these effects through a number of measures. For instance, providing leave for victims of violence and harassment, providing flexible working arrangements, providing protection against dismissal. And it also, which is very important, calls for member states to include domestic violence in workplace policies and risk assessments. We have seen a couple of beautiful practices that have happened during COVID-19. For instance, Australia, at the beginning of the teleworking new arrangements, put in place, recommended to include domestic violence in the risk assessments that the employers had to do in order to continue the activities, for instance, taking into consideration that a lot of women and men were working from home. We have seen employers in the UK providing their employees with information on services provided by the government for victims of violence, providing information on hotlines for violence, etc. So there's a lot that can be done. And it is necessary to recognize this link between domestic violence and the world of work. So I'll stop here and perhaps we can continue the conversation later.
Great. So a related question that I have is that COVID-19 has also seen an increase in work burdens for women specifically. So how can we protect women from the increased work burden that COVID-19 has created?
Okay. So Thank you for this question. And so when we look across the world, without exception, women perform 3/4 of unpaid care work. And this has been said before, but let me tell you a little bit of numbers that can give you an idea. In other words, we're talking of 76.2% of the total hours of unpaid care work is provided by women. No surprise here, right? And one of the main obstacles to better understand the dimension of unpaid care work is data, because we measure unpaid care work through time use surveys. But time use surveys, unfortunately, are not very common. And these are surveys that are very time consuming, they're very costly, and they're not systematically conducted in all countries. But time use surveys are essential if we really want to address and achieve gender equality. So looking at the countries that we have, we can say that globally 16.4 billion hours are spent in unpaid care work every day. This means 2 billion people work 8 hours per day for free. As the colleague from Hawaii said, I mean, it's stolen work. We also know that there's a major difference between the amount of working hours that women and men put into unpaid care work. So women dedicate 4 hours and 25 minutes per day against 1 hour and 23 minutes dedicated by men to unpaid care work. And this clearly makes women consistently time poor, more time poor than men. The good news is that we do see a little bit of increase from the side of men who are taking up more unpaid care work, but at the current pace, it will take 210 years to close the gender gap in care work. Now, we are progressing, but very, very slowly. It is a glacial rate, and this calls into question the effectiveness of the policies that we have been implementing and that we continue to implement. And here comes COVID-19. So COVID-19 suddenly woke up a lot of people, governments, men, people, women, on the importance of unpaid care work, on the importance of care leave policies, on the importance of care services, care infrastructures, on the importance of care workers and domestic workers. Employers, workers have realized the heavy impact that unpaid care work has on workers with family and care responsibilities and the difficulties in combining work and life. And so the need to ensure that we share the care between women and men, but also between families and the state. The demand for care has certainly increased during COVID-19 due to, of course, the closure of schools, the closure of daily centers, the closure of centers for people with disabilities, the closure of cooperatives that provide care. And in some cases, we have seen that some men have taken up a little bit more of unpaid care work. And the demand for care has been extremely high also in the informal economy and in situations of vulnerabilities. Now, when we talk about care, the world of care is very complex, but we do need to remember 3 key words. One is money, one is services, and one is time. Money because we do need to acknowledge and provide for those people that have care contingencies that occur during the individual's lives, being family care, upbringing of children, etc. And this is in the form of social protection schemes. We need social protection schemes that provide, for instance, in-kind cash for care transfer, cash for care in kind or cash transfers, or we need tax rebates, for instance. The second one is services. Absolutely, extremely important. We need services for early childhood, which is currently where we have a deficit, a big deficit. We need services for education. We need services for people with disabilities or for people in need of care. And we do need a lot of care infrastructures. for education, health, water, sanitation, transportation, all these services together, they have the potential to reduce the drudgery of unpaid care work. And then we need time. The third one, extremely important, and we have seen this, how everybody's time poor, especially during COVID. We need maternity, paternity, parental leave care policies. These are extremely important, and yet not many women and men benefit from this care leave policies. We need policies to support leave policies, to support people with disabilities, to support the sick, etc. But we also need time policies in terms of flexible working arrangements, teleworking, smart working, part-time, etc. So it is only when these three components, money, services, and time, come together in a very well-organized, thought, planned, informed, negotiated manner, that we are able to activate what we call the 5 R's, which are to recognize unpaid care work, to reduce, redistribute, reward unpaid care work. And we have seen how poorly care workers are paid during such an event like COVID-19. And we need representation. We need the voices of care workers and the people that benefit from care policies to be taken into consideration during the design of such policies. So just to quickly conclude, every from having good and well-implemented care policies. The business case is straightforward. In countries where you have a good combination of care policies, women tend to have higher rates in employment. Countries tend to have a more positive health, economic, and gender equality outcomes that reflects in better outcomes for children, for mothers, for fathers, and for older people and people with disabilities. And care leave policies generate a lot of jobs, and we want to have these jobs, decent jobs. We can say that if we, with substantive investment in care policies, we can certainly, by 2030, we could generate 120 million more jobs in the care sectors, which would in turn have an additional generation of 149 million indirect jobs. So I think it is very important to make sure that we understand that care is a social good. And as such, it has to be the primary responsible for care is the state that has to design, formulate, implement, fund, regulate the market, because of course there is also space for the private sector to be part of the care solution, but it has to be regulated, and monitor, and in case reorganize the care policies. Look at this combination of care policies. So it's very important, if all of this is taken into consideration, we do have the solution to recognize, reduce, redistribute unpaid care work, and reward paid and unpaid care workers and represent them in all these choices.
Thank you so much, Emanuela. That's incredible. So next, I have some questions for Alanoud. So Alanoud, your work deals with honor killings and preventing honor killings in Kuwait. So first, can you briefly tell us about what are honor killings and why do we have them?
Thank you, Pavita. First of all, our campaign, the campaign to abolish Article 153, deals with the issue of honor killings, not just in Kuwait, but in the Arabian Gulf and in the wider region. And the issue with honor killings is that it happens all over the world. It's just called different things. But specifically, it's to do with the idea of male guardianship, and the idea that male guardianship extends to disciplining female kin. So you will find honor killings and honor crimes being enacted against women in most cases, and against women who are relatives of men who feel that these women have somehow dishonored them or the family, or simply disobeyed them. And this is part of a greater issue of disciplinary violence when those who are in a position of power think that they can express their need to be obeyed through physical means. And it extends, beyond just the physical. It can be psychological, can be economic, can be sexual. And this is a problem, especially in parts of the world where there are laws that justify this behavior and treat it not as the heinous crime that it is, but like in Kuwait, as a misdemeanor, punishable by a maximum of 3 years in prison or 3,000 rupees fine. And the rupees is indicative of how old this legislation is. This legislation predates our constitution, and it's in violation of it, and it's in violation of our Islamic Sharia. So it is not even compliant with our religion. And of course, it violates all human rights conventions that Kuwait has ratified. So the idea that male honor is somehow wrapped up in a woman's body is the main issue. Why do they happen? Because of this idea. So in order to force a conversation about violence and the existence of violent legislations that allow disciplinary violence and allow male guardianship to spill over into acts of violence is problematic. And the social constructs, visible and invisible, that allow this type of behavior from male guardianship.
Wow, that's awful. Has COVID-19 seen an impact on honor killings? And if so, what is it?
Well, as my colleagues on this panel have spoken about before, COVID has made the issue of domestic violence come up to the surface much more clearly than it has before. In Kuwait, we were working for many years, not just to educate and raise awareness around the existence of an honor killing legislation. Most people in Kuwait, they think that they're blessed to live in a progressive and fairly liberal country, and they can't believe that such a backward legislation could exist. So while we were raising awareness around the existence of 153, it also forced a conversation about domestic violence and the fact that Kuwait, until very recently, did not have a domestic violence law, and we still don't have a functional shelter. We don't have resources for abuse survivors. We don't have hotlines and proper advocacy to help those who are suffering. In terms of honor killings specifically, what has happened with everybody being online all the time is that they started to get more attention than before. So over the course of the past 2.5 years, we've had 3 major incidents of honor killings make it to the news. The sad thing is, with honor killings, it is sometimes dishonorable to even categorize it as such, because people who commit these crimes, they don't want a conversation to happen around their honor. But those that have made it to the press, there was one case of a young lady being beheaded and her naked body found in the desert. Another one where a girl was shot in the stomach several times. And the case that happened most recently was a pregnant woman from a tribal background who got shot by a brother and then shot again and murdered while she was in the ICU by another brother. And that's her crime was marrying outside of the tribe. So the fact that people were focused on the issue of domestic violence and they had more time to be online gave this last awful incident a lot more, a lot more bandwidth than other incidents, which are just as awful. And it attracted a lot more interest in this legislation and in ending it, and in the social and legal practices that allow honor killings and this idea of honor being tied up in a woman's body to continue. So I think that what we have here is an unfortunate situation of having abuse survivors stuck at home in lockdown with their abusers, but also much more attention around how much they truly suffer.
Yeah. So then that begs the question, how can we change social and cultural norms in order to prevent honor killings?
Well, I think we do that by having conversations like this one, honest, frank, transparent, and open. I'm very honored and pleased to be part of the Civil Society 20 and to be speaking about the important role that civil societies play in changing hearts and minds around issues that are so entrenched and so taboo. When we launched this campaign 5 years ago, people were telling us that we were shameless. We're talking about honor and adultery and acts of violence that are domestic and that are within the family space. But today, we've made this a mainstream issue. And we lobbied consistently to get a domestic violence law passed in Kuwait and to have the Article 153 abolished. We managed to pass a bill in Parliament on May 2017, signed by 5 parliamentarians, to abolish Article 153. It still hasn't gained a priority and it still hasn't been voted on, but we managed to do that nevertheless. And in August of this year, just 6 weeks ago, they passed the domestic violence law in Kuwait. So now we finally have a legal cover so that we can work with abuse survivors under a legal umbrella. And also we have provisions within that law that will help us abolish articles such as 153 and other articles in our penal system that allow disciplinary violence against women. It's a cultural issue that needs cultural solutions. So we have to tackle this through art, through film screenings, through trainings, and to understand that we need to have a collaborative approach and not necessarily a controversial or a confrontational one. And I'm very happy to learn about what the ILO is doing to tackle sexual harassment in the workplace, because this is really part of the same issue. Honor killings is just one manifestation of gender-based violence. We need to really go after what Debra said. We really need to go after the structures that disempower women while we're talking about empowering them. And the work that I do through my consultancy, Ibtikar, focuses on helping women run for office and helping them reach decision-making positions, because I think having more women represented means that more and more of these issues will get tackled. And we really need a global stance. We need a global stance that says there shouldn't be any legislations anywhere that treat the murder of women or crimes against women differently than they do any other crime.
Thank you so much for that, Alanoud. Next, I have some questions for Musimbi. So, Musimbi, how can education be used as a tool to work towards gender equality?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Kavita. I am going to be speaking about education, and I think I'm going to be speaking about the key that helps us to be who we are and to do what almost everybody on this panel is doing, be able to have voice and to speak up. So first of all, the empowerment of women and girls and the achievement of gender equality are a matter of fundamental human rights, and they are really the base for the freedom that women want. And they form the base, the precondition for equality and sustainable social as well as even political development for women. So I'm coming to you from a long time of working in the women's movement, and currently chairing the board of the United World Colleges. And in the United World Colleges, we believe that education is a force to unite people, nations, and cultures for peace and sustainable futures. So what we do actually is we bring together young people post-secondary school to prepare them for even higher education. And we bring them from many nationalities to learn together and to address the issues that we face every day, including gender issues. And these are boys and girls, and the teachers are men and women. And we reach about 9,000 students a year in 18 schools that are spread all over the world. If you look at your region, you might find that there is a United World College school, and I invite you to check us out and see what we have done. Now, why is this important? For me, it's important in three different ways. One, if we are going to get the empowerment of women and gender equality, we have to find early ways of engaging boys and men, because they have to hear it from a very early age at the family level, as well as during the time of education, and specifically when they are at this step of getting to higher education, when they have an analytical mind and they can be able to question things, hear them, and really being given a safe space and an opportunity to be able to examine things that divide us, things that cause national conflicts, things that cause gender conflicts, race conflicts, etc. So this idea of really engaging people at institutions when they can learn together really gives opportunity for us to go to from the level of analyzing what the problems are into the level of seeking solutions. We know that when we talk about the empowerment of women, we are talking about the empowerment of half of the population, and that is going to affect and impact every aspect of the lives of people. So empowerment of women is not just about empowerment of women, but it's an empowerment that brings results that impact everybody's lives. Because we know several things that have been proven over time. We know that if women are empowered, if women are educated, they are likely to stand up for positions of leadership in their communities at every level. We have evidences that show that. They will stand up to be on boards of their schools, on boards of companies, on boards of NGOs. If women are educated, they will have the ability to think about what to do when they experience domestic violence, when they experience any form of violence, psychological or otherwise, because they will know that they are not crazy, that this is not happening to themselves alone, which is what happens to us when we are isolated as women without an education, when we don't have ability to be connected to other women, either through groups, women's movements, or any other organized groups. When we are kept in our home space, and that happens to us especially when we are not literate women. We are kept in our own space, and we are kept believing that traditions that our communities have had for a very long time are still valid traditions. But the moment we get an education, post-secondary school, and we begin to see other women and to see other places, our eyes open to our own liberation. And it's through our realizing our own liberation that we can seek liberation for all women. We know, and we have data, that a woman who has got 4 years of post-secondary school is going to be worrying about her reproductive health, and we'll do something about it. And we'll try to find ways in which she can be able to implement some of her choices, even when she's completely limited by the culture, by the religion, etc. She will be wise enough to find some way to be able to meet some of her needs, even if they are not all. We know that women who have education, and specifically post-secondary education, are able to invest in reducing the burdens of work in different ways. They find ways to reduce the burdens of work in different ways. And that's important and very much related to the work that colleagues have said in the earlier ways. I want to say 5 areas which we have sufficient data that higher education supports the improvements and the solutions that we want to see. One, higher education helps women to move away from extreme poverty, because they are able to get sometimes jobs that are a little better. It may take time, it's not all women, but it does improve on employability, and it does improve on choices of jobs that women are able to choose, and it does improve on the returns that women are able to use for their own families. We know that higher education allows women to be much more in the public space than when they don't have higher education. And I have talked a little bit about that. Higher education helps women to pay attention to maternal health and to sexual and reproductive health and rights as well. This is an area that is so sensitive that puts women behind, that they are questioned every day, and it requires extra strength and extra knowledge and extra skills to be able to do more about it. Higher education has enabled many women to get into the scientific fields, which for many years women have been excluded. And as such, we were not able to see women being present in the kind of products that are being provided for health for everybody else, that sometimes the absence of having tests that are relevant to women's bodies. We have seen women who have higher education analyze media and see how news are sent to the world. We have seen women who have higher education examine every aspect and ask, what is the presence of women or the absence of women mean for this policy that you have made, for this product that you are producing, for this news that you are putting out in the public, etc. Higher education enables all of this to happen. And higher education helps women to understand and stand for the gender equality in ways that we are not able to do it when we do not have higher education. So we know that the majority of school children who are out of school, 10 years ago, we were saying about 53% of young kids are out of school. I don't know what we are going to say after COVID. I don't know what we're going to say after COVID in terms of women going on for higher education. You heard Pavita begin by talking about how women, and especially girls who are just about to get into secondary school, are being sexually abused at the present, and many may drop out of school. We don't know what, for those of us that have been in education, we have realized that people actually cross the borders and go and study in other places, usually for higher education, not for primary education. And we've seen how countries have closed out international travel because of COVID. So we think that even though we are at a stage, we had reached at a stage where many scholarship opportunities are available for women to study in various places and maybe decide either to serve from those areas or go to the countries from which they were born and provide leadership, etc. We know that this is going to be affected. And so we have to keep our eyes open to try to see that women do not get closed out when the countries open and they travel again, and that there are other things that can support women to be able to travel also freely. We know that we have come through historically when even women were limited to travel because sometimes they couldn't even obtain passports on their own without the signing on of male persons in their families for passports. Many countries have overcome this. We could easily, as countries close after COVID, we could easily get countries that go back and practice this cultural limitation of women, and then women are closed in once again. So I would like to urge that we understand that any education is good for women and it's good for everybody, boys and girls, men and women, but specifically for women. And higher education specifically is important for women because that's what gives us opportunity to get more courage, to get out of our own local situation, and to be part of the global leadership that is so much needed. Women's leadership is needed all the time in every space, and higher education opens up women's leadership in that place, in those spaces. Thank you, Pavita.
Thank you. I wholeheartedly agree with you. Thank you for those remarks. Very quickly, if you can maybe just talk about why, or what can higher education institutions and academia do to encourage more women to enroll and achieve this cultural change that we're trying to go for?
Most universities do not have a discrimination on women, but the things that we do before acceptance to the university prevent women from applying to the universities. And then all of the things that colleagues have been talking about, whether it's violence, whether it's cultural practices, whether it's lack of school fees, etc., early marriages of women, ill health, etc., prevent women from progressing to the higher education. So one of the things that will be important is that policies of governments need to recognize that there are barriers that stand in the way of women and deal with those barriers. They should not leave this to women only. It's not about women solving these issues, but it's about all of the nations solving it, right from the governments themselves solving it and trying to see what needs to be put in place to open up the things that stand in the way of women's progress towards higher education. Universities and other higher education institutions, both tertiary institutions, institutions of training, institutions of giving people possibilities to learn at place of work, they need to be gender conscious and specifically be conscious of bringing in or creating space for women. And when I talk about women, I mean all women, women with disabilities need to be paid attention to, women of all races. It doesn't mean that you open a space for women and then you think that women are one entity. Women, I mean all women, because justice really means that justice is for everybody, not just for some. And so, and the last thing that I want to say is that it's really important that when women are at a place of work or at a place of higher education, they can also have choices on what they want to learn, how they want to learn, and bring into the teaching space also things that women care for, not only and how women care for those particular issues. It's very possible that women can influence how we learn science, women can influence how we learn journalism and anything else that we want to learn. They want subjects that impact on the lives of women to be part of the curriculum that we learn in higher education.
Thank you so much, Ms. Imbi. Before I ask Bailey some questions, I just wanted to remind our audience that if you do have questions for our speakers today, you're more than welcome to post them in the chat function, and we'll be addressing those after the panelists' remarks. So thank you again, Ms. Imbi. So next I'd like to turn to Bailey. So Bailey, you work at Girls 20, and I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the Girls on Boards initiative and what impact that initiative has seen.
Yes, absolutely. Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for having me. It's such an honor to share this sort of stage with these incredible speakers. I'm very honored. And I just want to start off by acknowledging that I'm dialing in today from Toronto, which is the traditional territory of the Mississaugas, Anishinaabeg, Chippewa, Haudenosaunee, and Wendat peoples, a traditional meeting place for many Indigenous communities. And I'm calling in from Girls 20. Many may know Girls 20 for our role in the G20 for the past 11 years. For advancing young women's participation in the G20 processes and in advocacy. And we'll be doing this again this year on October 24th at our first virtual summit. But today I'm actually going to talk about another program that Girls 20 launched in 2017, and that's Girls on Boards. The question today is sort of the realities of female empowerment, and Girls on Boards arose because we asked ourselves, what do we do with the power of those young women who are already empowered or who we have worked to empower through programs like the Girls 20 Global Summit? Girls on Boards has a very simple mission and approach. We are working to get young women aged 18 to 25 onto boards. This is part of our mission to advance young women in decision-making spaces, and again, to use their power to advance social change and to advance gender equality. So we looked around and we said, what is sort of the next natural space of power where young women can go, stir the pot a little bit, shake things up and create change? And we identified that as boards. Boards are a space where women are already seriously underrepresented. We know that the 30% Club works around the world to just get 30% of women represented on boards, and that is still a target that most countries are struggling to achieve. So through our program, we are building the capacities of young women. We provide training, and we train both sort of in the hard skills, so governance, negotiations, finances, but also look at the essential skills that young women are looking to develop to serve in these spaces of power. So it's finding their voice and learning how to negotiate and to use their voice. We work a lot with mental health professionals to ensure that young women are supported as they go into these spaces. We offer mentoring, and then finally, we work to actually match these young women onto boards.
Awesome. So you mentioned that the Girls on Boards program is focused on girls ages 18 to 25. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the significance of focusing on this particular age group.
Yeah. 18 to 25 is a really special age, we believe. Teen Vogue declared this decade the decade of rising youth activism. And all around the world, we are seeing young women in this age group really using their voice to create change, whether it's Malala, whether it's Greta, whether it's Autumn Pelletier in Canada, and whether it's the young women in your community. It's a critical age where young women are finding their voice, and we want to support them to learn how to use it and how to use it really effectively, whether they're advocating against honor killings or advocating for clean water access. This is the age where we see the greatest impact on young women's ability to be change makers.
Excellent. And then Billy, you and I have also talked about the idea of intersectionality in Girls 20's work. Can you talk about the role that intersectionality plays in female empowerment?
Yeah, absolutely. So for those who are maybe new to this term, intersectionality was a term that was coined by Kimberly Crenshaw. And it looks at something that Musimbi just spoke to, which is that women are not one single voice or single, representative body. Women come from so many different backgrounds. And whether it's their level of education or the ethnic group that they belong to, or whether they have possibly a disability, there are all these factors that change the way that women can access the economy and participate in society. And so we need to consider those when we are building programs and policy for women and for women's empowerment. Girls 20 is exploring how we can do that better, and we are constantly learning from our alumni how to effectively build a program that is intersectional. We did research last year. It's on our website, girls20.org, that looked at what are young women from different backgrounds, Indigenous women, Black women, young women living in rural versus urban communities. What do they say about the different experiences they have with leadership programs? And a few of the things that we found are that young women from marginalized backgrounds will speak to the need for mentorship and mentors who look like them and have similar lived experiences. So this is one of the things that we work hard to provide. They have also talked about the need for more mental health supports. And so I mentioned that before. This has become a big part of programming, is providing mental health supports to young leaders and to change makers who are navigating spaces that are dominated by misogyny and racism and ableism. And so how can we as an organization respond to the different needs of different young women? For policymakers out there, it's a big challenge because it requires more intervention, more support. You cannot write blanket policy for all girls, and this is what we are trying to achieve.
Fantastic. Thank you, Bailey. And amazing. Thank you to all of our panelists for sharing your time today and for sharing your wisdom with all of us, and for all of the work that you're doing year round to promote gender equity. I'm really glad that you were all here, and I'm truly inspired by all you do. So with that in mind, we have about 15 minutes for questions from the audience, and we'll try to get through as many as we can now. If for some reason we run out of time and your question is not addressed, you're also welcome to reach out to the panelists afterwards. So we got one question, which is, what would we be doing for women over 40 in the workplace, as most psychologists state that women over 40 would never be in managerial positions? So maybe Emanuela, would you like to start with that?
So it's a very interesting question, and clearly we know that the percentages of women in managerial and leadership positions have not really increased over the past decades. And at the moment, we know that more or less we have a 27% of women that are in managerial positions. However, there is a good piece of information, which is that women are actually now catching up faster than men in terms of reaching out to managerial positions. This has to do with, certainly with the education, the fact that if you look at young managers, I do mean in their 40s still, between 35 above, we do see that young women tend to go faster than men, 1 year faster. They're able to reach such positions 1 year faster than men. This has to do with education, but also with determination, etc. Having said that, in the moment a young woman becomes a mother, then the motherhood penalty kicks in, and certainly there is a motherhood leadership penalty, and this also comes with the gender pay gap, the motherhood pay gap, etc. So I think we can say that there have been tiny and timid improvements, but certainly it is an area where we need to work more, and this can be through this overall changing of mindsets, certainly, but also this overall need for care policies that can help women to balance better work and life and work and family, and therefore also trying to achieve better positions in their workforce, in their careers.
Thank you, Emanuela. So then we have a question. In situations of conflict or war, how do we mitigate the immediate needs of safety and food or shelter, and ensure the safety and empowerment of women? So I'll open it up to any of the panelists if you have a response to that.
Is the question about how do we care for women in conflict situations?
Yes.
Yeah, I think people who are working in conflict situations, and probably many of us have had the experience of either being present or being with the organizations that have worked in conflict situations. I have in my professional work. There is now a consciousness that women experience conflict in different ways. One is in every conflict situation, when you have people gathered, there are certain expectations on women that still continue, whether they are in the home or they are in a refugee camp or they are on the way to just escaping. The care responsibilities that women have does not stop. The kids will cry because they will have kids, they'll have older people who need care, and the women continue to think about how to sustain those people even before they think about their own lives. So that's really important. And many organizations that are working in humanitarian areas have over the years found that they do need to give attention to women. It doesn't always happen 100%, but I can say, having seen the progress over the years, it's completely different from the way it was before. Nowadays, you'll find that there will be people who will look at issues such as what women need for their own protection, things such as sanitary towels. Nowadays, you'll find that there will be certain people that will check onto that to see that women have that. Things such as IDs. Sometimes women don't have IDs because they have been in communities that probably did not supply IDs, and the men had IDs because they had to go and work, and they might have something that identifies them. And women sometimes don't even have anything that identifies them if they are in communities that do not have that. So really looking out for things like IDs. And then in relationship to food, it's very important that people realize that women always feed themselves last when everybody else has eaten. And sometimes malnutrition and lack of care for self for women happens in conflict situations quite a lot, especially in crowded situations. And women get infectious illnesses that are connected both with our anatomy, but other things as well that are important to look at. So there are just a lot of gender-based issues that need to be looked at in conflict situation, both when they are stagnant or whether they are on the move, and also when they get to the country that is receiving them, should there be an escape as displaced persons. And whether they are internally displaced or externally displaced, there are gender issues that need to be looked into.
Awesome, thank you. Next question we have is, what advice can you give to startups and local companies to alter their policies to adhere to female workers' needs? So maybe Bailey or Emanuela. Bailey, would you like to start?
Sure, I'll start and then I'll pass it to Emanuela. I think first and foremost, it's important to ensure that the women in that company are in the room where this policy is being developed, are being consulted and really listened to. I think one of the pitfalls that we've seen many companies and many organizations take is develop high-level policies without the input of the women who are being impacted, or to seek their advice and their input and maybe not believe them when they say that one thing is important or something else is important. So they might say it's really important to have a room for nursing. And we have seen many companies listen to that and then not provide that. So, this is one example of really listening to female employees and believing what they say is important. Emanuela?
Yeah, I think nowadays, if you are a startup and you're not taking gender equality or diversity and inclusion into consideration, you're meant to fail. Simply because statistically, empirically, we know for a fact, and it's not questionable because the research now is extremely advanced on the fact that if you want to be thriving in the economy, you need to take gender equality into consideration, being in the setup of your office, being in the consideration of working hours, or the time, how you organize your work, the freedom, the trust that you need to put into your workers, the rewarding the reward that you need to make sure that that applies into your startup. The fact that you need to provide career opportunities for both young women and men, and that you probably need to have a management setup that is very well aware of gender equality and that takes into consideration all those obstacles that discriminate women from joining, remaining, re-entering, and progressing in the world of work, including violence and harassment, and in particular sexual harassment that we know is very, very preoccupying, especially for young women. So I think if you don't take this into consideration, you're simply going to be out of business relatively soon, or being from a point of view of designing products, really tapping into the resources of the market, looking for different talents, looking for people with different ideas, with different ways of understanding the needs of consumers. So I mean, seriously, you either take it into consideration or you're not going to be successful. I think by now this is the solution, and entrepreneurs, I think they know it as well. And I think now it's not a matter of money because gender equality is not necessarily a cost or a burden. I mean, it's something that pays back very well everybody.
Yeah, definitely. I completely agree with that. So I think this next question is for Alanud. So how have advocacy efforts and voices of civil society reached policymakers in Kuwait?
Lobbying. We show up in Parliament as much as we can. We visit the parliamentarians one by one. We even arranged to see the Speaker of the House several times, and he was, very supportive of the domestic violence bill in its last push, and even invited us to attend its actual voting that happened in Parliament. And we sit with policymakers, ministers, and we work a lot with policymakers. So we take their advice when they suggest that this is not an issue you take to Twitter without educating people about it. We listened, and we, as much as possible, try to come up with our own data-driven points. So because there's a lack of statistics and studies, we conduct studies, and we do fundraising so that we can have our own surveys done, so that when we go speak to policymakers, we have numbers. We can say, more than 80% of Kuwaitis don't know that this law exists. 63% of them support abolishing it. And that puts you in a very different position. But the one important thing to remember is that when you're dealing with politicians, what they say when you're in the room may be very different from what happens when you leave this room. So you have to be persistent. You have to keep showing up. And you have to make this an issue of hearts and minds in the media, in as many forms as you can. And as much as possible, you have to make your issue sticky and open. You can't centralize it. You have to make it something that people can adopt and run with. So when young people want to hold fundraisers for us in spin classes, that's something we're very grateful for. And when companies that have huge CSR budgets wants to work with us, we are grateful for that, because it's all encompassing. And the more that the legislators see you and see that you're not going to back down, and this is not a phase, that you are very serious, and you're not fazed by criticisms or people trying to sue you. They're trying to keep the conspiracy of silence around domestic violence going. And unfortunately, this is a risk that all the founders have to take upon themselves, a risk to their career and to their reputation and even to their physical selves and their families. But you have to be sure that the cause is worth it and that you're going to keep pushing. And I feel like this is something that comes up when we do diversity trainings in the company, and when I speak to women who are further in their careers and they're above 40 and they're at something of a crossroad, and we want them to also be involved in the change. I think there's a lot of emphasis sometimes on younger women because we all know that it's a longer runway for women to make it to leadership positions. So you have to invest in them more when they're younger. But sometimes I feel that it's, the older women who have operational gray hairs and who have a life experience that don't get enough of a chance. And so when we do empowering women in politics programs, we open it from early 20s to mid 50s, because when women are involved beyond the parameters of where the glass ceiling is in their jobs, and most of the time it's a marble ceiling and not a glass one, then they can be funneling that energy into civil society and into being persistent and taking up causes that are important for all women.
Thank you. Musimbi, you wanted to add to that?
And very much appreciation of the work that Manuela is doing. And I wanted to add that I think one of the areas that has really helped to move forward these debates of cultural practices that are harmful to women has been the organizing of the women's movement world over for many, many years. Actually, even beyond our time, to our mothers' times, our times, and then your times, and the times probably of even much younger women. Because what is really built on is because traditions are so hard to go. They go for a very, very long time, and patriarchy is so hard to unbuild and to remove because it's so systemic. And a lot of women believe in these things. And so we have to work on the systemic level. I want really to put a big shout for women organizing and creating movements and creating women's human rights defenders who are on the front line, like Manuela and others, who really put their lives on line. And there are so many of these issues. And then we have come to see them not as private issues, but as political issues. They are out there in public. We organize around the United Nations and we speak at them in those places that are so sanitized by the people who are there, in the same way as we speak about them in the villages, where in our own villages where they happen, or in our own towns where they happen. I think this has been a really big contribution for all of us as women. And when we learn that Manuela is dealing with honor killings in a particular country, and I'm dealing with probably female genital mutilation in another particular country, and somebody else another issue, but collectively, these are harmful practices that are not good for women, and they are violence against women, and we should do something about it. And I think that it's really great when we meet together, but when we provide data and when we can speak in public spaces all together. I have been involved in the area of funding because I think women who organize in this level need funding, and really being able to convince people that this work needs funding is really important as well. And women's funds all over the world, which I know pretty well, have really worked hard in funding specific activists in many countries, in like Kuwait, to do something about it. And I just wanted to acknowledge and affirm you, Manuela, and many other people that are on the front line in this area.
Thank you so much for that, Musimbi. We'll take one more question, which is how can young women and girls help with female empowerment globally? Any of the panelists want to address that? Bailey?
I feel like maybe everyone can address that, but I'll speak very quickly. And I think the most important thing is to acknowledge that they are. I think that young women really right now are doing such extraordinary work to lead empowerment and gender equality in their own communities. And I really think that we need to give them more resources to do that. Young women are doing this on shoestring budgets, if no budget at all. They're harnessing social media, and using, free Google Drive and all of these resources, Facebook Messenger, WhatsApp, to organize movements, which is absolutely incredible. But we can provide them more support. If you work in philanthropy or funding, we can look at new ways to fund these social movements, to fund young women who maybe don't have the traditional credentials of a charity, but are doing the work, and support their movements and listen to young women ultimately, because they really know what is needed.
If I may, I stand on the shoulder of giants, women pioneers who came before me in Kuwait and who had to break taboos, and not just in Kuwait, but in the Arab world and in the region, and it made it easier for me to do what I do today. And I hope that the battles that I fought, I was the last generation that wasn't allowed to vote, and I went on protests to demand that we're included in a democracy. And my daughter's generation never has to do that again. And I feel that this is also part of what we can do for young women, is that we can give them the space, fight battles that they don't have to fight, and then support them in the battles that they want to fight, because their generation has different needs and different focuses than ours. And we have to shine a spotlight on them as well, so that it'll be easier for them to do what they need to do. And as Bailey said, social media has been a game changer, especially in my part of the world, because you don't have the burden of ambassadorship. You already have a platform and a voice, and you're ready to go.
Excellent. Great. So we're just about out of time. So again, I just want to thank all of you for coming together today around such an important issue. As all of our panelists said, conversations such as these truly do make a difference and help ensure that we don't have to learn through accidents. So today's conversation will be used to influence G20 leaders' agendas and will be sent to relevant G20 working groups. A recording of this panel will be available on the C20 Summit platform and also on YouTube. And I look forward to being in touch with as many of you as possible. And I hope that you all enjoy the rest of the summit. So thank you all so much. Have a great day.